What's up? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. In today's video, I am back for video number 4 in this great series with Frank Alexander, who is the ATC and physician extender for the New York Yankees team doctor, Dr. Chris Ahmad. So in videos 1, 2, 3, we talked about, what happens when you first hurt your elbow, what's going to happen if you need surgery. And then in video 3, we talked about what's going to happen at surgery date through month number 4. So in this video, number 4 in the series, we're going to talk about months 4 through 8 in your recovery. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into this conversation with Frank Alexander. All right, so Frank, months 4 through 8, this is where a lot of the exciting stuff starts to happen in Tommy John rehab. You're going to start to transition into more normal-ish weight training. That's the thing that's going to happen. There's a lot of questions about rehab. Do you continue the same kind of rehab with your physical therapist, your team? And obviously you start throwing. So let's start with the first thing, which is throwing. So transitioning from I've just been taking care of my little baby bird elbow, and now it's ready to start flying out of the nest. What does the first part of throwing look like?
This is probably the most exciting time for a player that has just had Tommy John surgery. For the last 4 months, you've been on the shelf, you've been rehabbing, maybe you've been away from the team. There's so much that you're looking forward to, and you've been looking forward to this day from day one, from the day of surgery. And that last 4 months has flown by like that. So there's a lot that goes into it, and hopefully your physical therapist has gotten you ready to reach this milestone. There are some PT polishing that needs to be done before you get that ball in your hand. But the first day, know that when you get that ball comes out of your hand, it's not going to be your best throw ever in your life.
Yeah, and I remember, I'll overlay some footage if I can find it from my archives, but I remember that first day in both surgeries. And of course, the second time around, it was a lot easier because I knew what to expect. But this is not like throwing a baseball as much as it's like sort of throwing a grenade. Like you're really nervous, you're excited to throw, but your first throws are 30 feet and you're just like afraid your arm's going to explode on that first throw. So they're lobs, right? And I didn't have much pain for the first bunch of months. I was pretty okay, but a lot of people do. I mean, what can people expect as far as like soreness, pain? Because they're giving their body a new stimulus, and this is a big new stimulus. They haven't done any throwing. So what do you typically advise people to expect when they start throwing?
The first day, to your point, we tell patients and players, you're throwing with enough intensity and effort to reach your throwing partner. This is a brand new Maserati, Rolls-Royce, Bentley that you are taking for a Sunday stroll. This is not a muscle car that you are racing a quarter mile. We want to make sure that this rehab throwing is just that. It's rehab throwing. And it's either 35 or 45 feet is your maximum distance on day one. So you should be able to throw and play catch with somebody who has never played baseball before with enough effort just to reach them. And the one thing to really expect on day one, it might not be immediately after you finish throwing, but even at 45 feet, you're going to have some level of soreness in your shoulder, your elbow, your throwing arm. So anticipate that.
Yeah, that's a good point and I definitely saw players that I've worked with who are rehabbing from surgery do this wrong because they're like, they're throwing like a firm throw that would hit someone in the chest and continue going for another 60 feet. It's like, that's not the point of laying out this distance. If it says 60 feet, the ball shouldn't go much farther. It would hit your partner in the chest, but then it would die and it would go like 70 feet tops, right? Like Aroldis Chapman, in Yankee Stadium, throwing 104 is only throwing 60 feet, but that's exactly not what we're trying to do here, right? So the ball shouldn't continue on a line for the next 270 feet if your partner missed it.
We actually had a kid recently who he was about 7.5 months out, and he finally reached 90 feet. And at that point, there was something intrinsically that he decided that he wanted to test it out and see how hard he could throw. He actually wound up feeling a pop in his elbow, and then automatically he shut down. We saw him in the office. When we were examining him, he actually started crying because he thought he re-injured himself. He was so scared. So that's why I always tell these guys early on, you should not be throwing at 100% effort. Now, on the other side of that, there are guys that do not know how to slow down. So there are pros that throw 100% of the time. And but they have years of experience in knowing their body, and they have a million professionals around them and really watching them. So you really have to be careful when it comes to when you want to test it out.
Yeah, those guys probably have no friends on the team as far as their other pitchers, because everyone hates the guy who like can't throw slow. Like you're trying to throw a flat ground in the bullpen or in the outfield, and you're like, dude, throw it half speed to me. Why are you throwing 88 miles per hour while I'm crouched down playing catch? No one likes to play catch with the guy that can't throw slow. And that is an important skill to learn. It's hard to keep your mechanics intact for a lot of players when you're throwing slow. Like a lot of young players are like one speed bikes where they only know how to throw mostly their full speed when they're playing catch. And that's not a good habit. Like you need to learn, and you do learn this from surgery, what 35% effort is, what 40% effort feels like, what a 120-foot throw feels like, what a 180-foot throw feels like. And it's a valuable, that's how you should learn to warm up anyway, because that's what warming up is, right? Everyone starts playing catch at 45 feet, doing your drills and starting to back up for all, healthy pitchers alike. You start short because you're letting your arm slowly throw harder. That's called warming up. But a lot of players just don't know how to warm up well in general. And this is definitely the time to learn that. So one thing I want to ask you, a lot of people get this idea, and I was actually talking with a friend recently who's who is doing rehab on a knee, and she was kind of talking about how, well, I'm kind of doing a little bit more than the protocol says I should, but it's stuff like, I'll jog. I'm not really supposed to jog, but I'll jog and it feels fine. But it's like feeling fine isn't an indicator of whether you're actually fine, right? Like, because I remember during my surgery, I felt fine at 6 months. Like I didn't have any pain throwing, but that didn't mean that I could just open up the throttle, like you just said, and throw 90 miles per hour. Like if you don't have pain today, that doesn't mean you can do anything you want.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because just because you're feeling good, it doesn't mean that you accelerate the process. And as we've been talking about, guys, quote unquote, trusting the process, you really just have to let the program, whether it's your rehab protocol or your throwing program, guide you along the way. Now, there are some things that you can say get away with, and that's where a skilled rehab and pitching coach rehab professional and pitching coach really come into play, because they're like chefs in a kitchen. They have the recipe in front of them, but they know how to really add a little bit more. They're innovative. They really know how to take a little bit more of this or add a pinch of that and really just make something special. So you really have to have the right people around you and not just make this a decision on your own to speed up. You really have to take it under the guidance of your physician, your athletic trainers, your PTs, your pitching coaches, people that really understand where you are and where you need to be.
And let's talk about radar gun use versus distance use. So for me, in my second surgery, I got surgery in August both times, but my second time around, just knowing what I knew about it, I decided that I didn't want to do a distance-based throwing protocol. Plus, I was going to have to do most of my throwing in the winter months anyway, which I was doing at my baseball academy that I owned. And so I tried to figure out, I recruited some high school kids to help me with this when it was still warm enough. We kind of mapped out like what a 120-foot throw was. And we did this, what we were just talking about. I said, hey, can you guys I want you to throw 60 feet, then 75, then 90, then 120, and I'm going to radar gun it. And I want you to throw just hard enough to get there. So like a firm line, but not a bullet. It's got a little bit of arc in it, right? So we did a radar gun and figured out, there's a formula, obviously, like every 15 feet farther is like X amount of miles per hour, like 3 to 4. I can't remember the exact numbers. But anyway, so we mapped it out. I got a good idea of what a foot was worth in miles per hour, essentially, right? And so then what I did with my throwing protocols, I kind of converted my distance into miles per hour. And so then all my throwing was done in a batting cage in my baseball academy. And so I was like, all right, today I get to throw 60 feet, quote unquote, which is 37 to 42 miles per hour. That's the range that I'm trying to stay in. And I know some other PTs, some major league teams do that. This was mentioned at the ASMI Injuries in Baseball conference a couple years ago, that more and more teams are going to this. What are the pros and cons of each? Do you guys ever do that? Is that sort of a case-by-case basis?
So usually what we do in the infancy of a throwing program is we actually deter people from using a radar gun just to avoid the situation that I discussed earlier with that young player who at 90 feet decided that he was going to let it loose and let it eat. And so we
Yeah.
really kind of don't like it for that purpose. Truthfully, we actually did a study very similar to yours, Dan. We haven't published the data, but we took young kids from, I believe the youngest was around 10 or 12 years old, all the way to 18 years old. And we studied what their perceived velocity was between 60, 90, and 120 feet. And then we asked them to kind of titrate up or titrate down at each distance. And believe it or not, they were a little bit more accurate at further distances, but not so much at closer distances. So it was harder for them to really understand what it meant to throw at 50%. And every kid's 50% is very different, especially where they are in their growth and maturity curves in their lives. So for using technology, there is a time and a place for it. It's just a matter of what is the right time and where is the right place.
Yeah, and I know for me, I was surprised a lot of times at just how as you get warmed up. So say I'm like throwing at, my goal velocity for that day was 57 to 61, right? I was just surprised. Like I'd be cruising along at 57, I'd make like 8 throws, and I'm like, all right, I'm within range. And then with seemingly no increase in effort, like I didn't try to do this, it just comes out like 62. And then the next one's 64. And I'm like, I didn't perceive, if I didn't have the radar gun, I would have had no idea that I was throwing over my limit essentially. And for me, having gone through this and being diligent, I was like, I'm not trying to impress the radar gun. I'm not going to use the radar gun for evil, like we just talked about, and see how hard I can throw. I was just surprised how big my range would be within the similar perceived effort. I was like, dang, I can't believe that I'm actually throwing 5 miles per hour over my target today when I really didn't mean it. And it just showed me how big that variance can be when you're just trying to hit your partner in the chest. Like you just start to feel a little bit good. Your mechanics start to kind of like cruise, and you're just like, boom. And there just can be that really big range. So yeah, I can definitely see your point, because young kids love impressing the radar gun. But if they are mature enough where they can say, hey, I really just want to use this as a stop sign and use this as a limiter, then it can be a good tool that way too.
Perception's really helpful in these situations too, because even though, and going back to our previous videos where you could be cruising through an outing and your arm actually doesn't feel that good, but then the day that you feel the best, you can have your worst outing of your life. So perception is super helpful in those kind of situations. And like you said, not trying to impress the radar gun or put up the 99 on a running gun early on in your recovery. Those are very important.
All right, so let's talk about the PT aspect of this right now. So obviously PT is the main thing you do in months 0 through 4. And then it starts to take a little bit of a back seat. Not a back seat, but there's just more things added, right? Throwing is added. There's just a lot of other things going on in this phase. What does the PT and the rehab look like in this phase?
Yeah, this is more of a transitory phase where you're going to be throwing 3 days a week now. And then you're trying to figure out arm care and physical therapy. How do they fit into this? You're also trying to juggle classes and schoolwork too. So there's only so much time in any given day. So this is where players will really start to phase out of formal physical therapy. If you're going 3 or 4 times a week, now you're going to be going 2 or 3 times a week. Usually I tell players when you start throwing, go once or twice a week for what I'll call maintenance work and soft tissue work, just because you are going to have soreness those first couple days out. And even as you progress in those initial phases, so going 35, 45 feet, and then when you jump to 45, 60 feet, 60, 75 feet, I won't become any more redundant than that. But as you reach each new stimulus, there is going to be some soreness there. So it's always great to have your PT kind of keeping tabs on you, because you may not actually follow up in your doctor's office for maybe 2 or 3 months when you're in your flat ground throwing program.
And so formal PT starts to slow, but players are still doing, like you mentioned, arm care. So transitions kind of like from rehab to arm care, quote unquote, where arm care is just sort of the ongoing stuff that you just need to be doing. So players they just have their protocol from the PT. It's like, hey, do this after you throw, or on off days, or on this, and that's sort of the back seat, and then they'll go to see their PT. Is that kind of the scope of it?
Yeah, that's typically what we do in our office with our players, and every doctor is different in terms of what their rehab protocol looks like. So I would say in general principle, we have them start to phase out of physical therapy, usually somewhere around 3 months is where they start doing a little bit more upper body exercises following surgery. So they're working a little bit more, especially guys at the college level. They're working more with their strength and conditioning coaches at that time and working with the athletic training staff and the PTs in conjunction and making sure that they're not going off the rails. But once you start throwing, you definitely want to be continuing your entire body workout and what we call baseball workouts. You're not weight training like a football player because otherwise you'd be playing football. You want to make sure that your baseball workouts are there, especially for your core and lower half, because as we've discussed all along the way here, we toe the rubber, we don't shoulder it.
And so with strength training, that's something that's not really going to be handled by your PT staff. And physical therapists are unfortunately sometimes not well versed in strength training. Obviously, there's some blend over between the two, but they're different jobs for sure. So where do players get guidance on strength training, and what does that process look like as they start off? Because I remember obviously like you're doing a 15-pound curl with a dumbbell, and then you're starting to do rows with 20 pounds, and you progress very slowly. And there's a lot of exercises that you shouldn't do, like having your elbow in a valgus position on a back squat, for example. So there's a lot of different types of bars and different ways to modify exercises. Some exercises are compliant, some are not. What's the quick rundown on strength training as kids get started with it?
So strength training, and a lot of this is geographical as well, because if you're in the New York metro area or Boston or LA, there are a lot of PTs that do have strength and conditioning background as well. Guys that have worked in Major League Baseball or the minors that know how to help with this transition phase. So it's really having somebody like that around is super helpful. And knowing who the right people are to get you from one phase to the next is also going to be part of that transition. Sometimes PTs have strength and conditioning coaches in-house as well, so that could also be helpful. We're seeing a lot of that blend in a lot of the big name PT and strength and conditioning facilities all throughout the country. So a lot of baseball facilities, baseball PT and strength and conditioning coaches are really working together in harmony to get these guys back together. It's not anymore where you have to go see this guy for PT and then on days 3, 4, and 5, you see that guy for strength and conditioning. So it really becomes a nice blend, and even some places you can throw in there. So you have strength conditioning, PT, and your throwing program all in one place. So again, that is becoming more prevalent throughout the country, but it's not the case, and it could be different from like where you were in Indiana versus being in a big city metro area.
Yeah, where I did my second surgery with Dr. Kremchek in Cincinnati, they had that exact flow. So they had their long building, and the one end was like the surgery center, and then at the very end of the other side was I can't remember the name of the franchise, but it was a sports performance franchise. So they literally you went down the line from surgery to rehab, and then they had their strength and conditioning in-house as well. So they were all working together just like that, which makes the most sense because then everyone's in the loop. You know, PT is communicating with the strength coaches are communicating with the surgeon if needed, like all that stuff. So that makes a lot of sense, but a lot of players won't have that either.
Yeah, we actually have that in our sports performance center in our office. We have our doctor's office on one half of the building. The other half of the building is our PT coaches, our PTs, and our strength and conditioning coaches. So you kind of make a horseshoe you come see us first, or you see them first, and then on your way out, you swing through our office. And then we even have a baseball field right outside the back of our performance center so that guys are able to throw, and our PTs will throw with them if that's the case. We don't have an in-house pitching coach, unfortunately, but it's definitely a facility where it makes life very easy for baseball players.
And so for players that don't have access to that, and maybe they're getting surgery somewhere and then they're going back to their small town or wherever, what do you recommend? Do they just need to try to find someone who has worked with enough baseball players? Obviously, there's more baseball-specific training facilities, I think now that more than ever, which is great. But they just really need to find someone that has a clue about how to, the do's and don'ts. And are there guidelines typically from, the rehab team, like, hey, if you go find a local strength coach, here's the do's and don'ts, here are exercises that are on the no list. Like, how do you kind of guide players through that?
Yeah, so we actually have a return to strength and conditioning protocol. So once you're phasing out of physical therapy, we have that protocol in play for you right away. And then once you transition out, we also have like you said, the no-nos. Here are the exercises we want you to absolutely avoid. Here are the ones that if you need to, for whatever purpose, are on our kind of wishy-washy list. We prefer if you don't, but if somebody's telling you you have to do it, meaning whether it's your coach at school or whoever, and your spot on the team is in jeopardy if you don't have metrics for that lift, there are some places that unfortunately that happens with kids. But in our situation, if we say that you're not allowed to do an exercise, usually the athletic training staff, the PT staff, the strength and conditioning coaches, and even the baseball coaches are on board with that because they have the player's best interest in mind.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen everywhere, though.
Yeah, like I'm sure power cleans are one of those exercises where a lot of kids at their high school are, supposed to do power cleans with the team, and it's a mostly useless exercise for baseball specific training anyway. But definitely not a good one for your elbow in that vulnerable state. And I could see that being something where, again, if a coach is just clueless, he's going to force a player to do that, which is terrible. But it should be just like any other doctor's note in school where it's like, hey, I'm not allowed to do this because of X medical condition. It should always fall in line. But like you said, sometimes it doesn't, which is sad because it's 2022. And you think the way our society is, people would just, again, take medical advice under advisement and say, okay, you're exempt from this lift, but it doesn't always go that way.
It's tricky because when players want that full clearance, it's when I type up a clearance letter for guys, they are cleared without restrictions. But then if I put restrictions on them, there's a lot of red tape that may go along with it with like their school. So they need to be cleared for everything. It's an all or none principle, unfortunately. So, and also the guys, not that too many two-way players, and by two-way, I mean two-sport athletes. I feel like when we were in school, Dan, the two-sport athlete, varsity athlete was a living breed. Now it's a dying breed. I don't know too many kids that are two-sport, and the three-sport varsity athlete is that's like a dinosaur. You're never going to see that, and hopefully that reverses that trend. But if a baseball player in the fall plays football and their football coaches want them to do a power clean, yeah, that's a great football workout. But if your ultimate goal is to play college baseball, then you might need to have that conversation with your football coaches.
Yeah, and it really does come down to just vouching for yourself. And this is where parents sometimes, like, I don't want parents involved in their kids' sports careers very often because there's too much intervention with parents getting on coaches about playing time, et cetera, et cetera. It's going in by far the wrong direction. But this is one of those times where it does require, like, look, coach, I don't care what you do. My kid's not doing this because he's not going to jeopardize his surgery and his recovery. So that's where the parent needs to step in and the kid needs to speak and advocate for themselves, because you're going to kick yourself. You're like, oh, well, was this power clean worth it? My elbow is in shambles now. And was that worth it? And that's just one example of an exercise, but you do need to advocate for yourself. And this goes back to, we'll cover this in later videos, but when you get into a game, sometimes coaches will be like, oh, hey, can you give me 4 innings? Like, no, I can give you 1. That's what the protocol says. I can give you 1, not 4, not 3, not 2, 1. And that's where parents and players need to just draw a firm line and not be like, oh, it'll probably be okay. I don't want to rock the boat. No, coach, it's 1 and I'm out. And if I feel bad, you're taking me after 1 hitter. So, yeah, those are hard conversations to have. And that's where the parent needs to sort of act as the agent for their kid. And it can be tough. And then there's also, I want to discuss just the progression with the weight room, being really diligent and cautious with progressive overload. Like, it feels dumb doing, like a dumbbell bench press with 15s. And you're like, this is a waste of my time. But that's just what you do. And then next week, maybe you do 18 pounds. Then maybe you do 20 pounds. Then maybe you do 25 pounds 2 weeks later. And then you do 30 pounds. I think it gets tough to trust the process, like we discussed with strength training, especially when you're still, you'll still have a baseline of strength, if you're strong and you had been lifting prior. Whereas you just start this strength training thing again, you're literally doing silly, tiny amounts of weight that make you feel like you're just wasting your time. but it's important to just start where you start and just slowly progress, right? Like even if it's just 2 pounds or 5 pounds at a time.
Yeah, that's the hardest part for a lot of these guys is knowing when to the right time is to really push. And in the beginning, 2-3 pounds, it seems silly, but that's what's going to keep you healthy. And that's what builds these initial layers of your foundation. So that's one of the things that you really got to be mindful of, that even though you feel good enough to throw up 45 pounds and do that, it might not be a good idea based on where you are. So really, it's a lot of this is just by feel and knowing, even though you feel good, you really just, hey, today's not the day to push it.
Yeah. And I really want to reiterate the point that feeling good is not the metric that I can do anything I want. And the way to really, I think this is a good way to make this point sink in, is that when people get injuries, like say you're sprinting and you pull your hamstring, or you're squatting and you pull your quad, or you tweak your calf doing something, rarely does it like slowly creep up, like it hurts a little, then it hurts a little more. A lot of times it just happens all at once, right? Just like the way you blow your elbow out in the game. So many pitchers blow out their arm from one pitch to the next, where pitch number 77 felt fine and pitch number 78 was a pop, right? So the idea that you'll always feel like it's too much isn't real life. Lots of times you're just doing a set of squats and rep number 5, you tear your hamstring and you go down with the bar, and hopefully you have your safety bars up, right? And that's the same thing here. The idea that, oh, I feel fine, therefore I can do X isn't true. You don't know what's going on in your body, especially as this ligament is ligamentizing, it's healing. It's a slow process. Just because it's not screaming in pain or like having, some sort of reaction, that's not an indicator that it's not one rep away from being injured, right? And so I think that's just important for people to remember that from one step to the next, you might tweak your calf. From one rep to the next, you might pull your quad. Like, injuries are sudden and they come often without warning.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that they are sudden and they may not come with a warning. But if there are warning signs, there is soreness, you are feeling, hey, that didn't feel right, stop what you're doing. Nobody's going to say, oh, you need to do that one more. Hey, if I do this one more, maybe that might be the tipping point that you wish that you didn't. The one thing that I will say, just
live to fight again.
Yeah. The one thing I will say, to touch on your point, kids they're people pleasers. And they're competitors. They don't want to pull themselves out of a game. They don't want to pull themselves out of an exercise. But to have that voice, to have that self-advocacy, for a parent to step in when they feel that their child is being quote unquote abused in a way that could lead to injury, that is very important, and that can't be understated. Knowing, hey, you're at 88 pitches, oh, but he has a limit of 100, maybe 87 was the max. Maybe now we're getting into those dangerous waters. So it really can't be understated how much self-advocacy and parent advocacy could really help a kid in the long run. Again, there is a time and a place for it, and this is one of them.
Yeah, and really what you're doing, and this is what all sorts of training in life does, it builds capacity. So, there's this great curve that I think Mike Reinold has used. I've seen it a bunch on his channel. He's a great PT. And everyone has a capacity, and then everyone also has a limit where they get injured. So if I were to go out today, like I run a couple miles a couple times a week. If I was going to go out and run 20 miles today, I'd probably have some sort of injury, right? I could maybe run 8 miles before I reach my level of fitness, like my capacity for training. And then above 8, maybe that's where like my body's overloaded and then I get hurt. But if I consistently run 3 miles, then 4 miles, then 5 miles, then 6 miles, then 8 miles, then 10 miles, eventually I can run a whole marathon and not get injured, right? That's how capacity works. So when you're starting this rehab process with your arm, your capacity is just very low and you don't know where that limit is. So maybe you could do 45 pounds on a dumbbell bench press today, but that's right at like the red line. And that might be the tipping point where you're either really sore or maybe you actually hurt yourself, right? Maybe you could throw a little bit harder today. You could throw 90 feet instead of 60 feet, but 90 feet might be right at that line and you don't know, right? And so you don't want to push to that capacity. You want to slowly build capacity as you start to increase your training load. and then everything continues to stay. You stay safely beneath sort of like that red line that you don't know where it is, right? On a car, you have a red line and the manufacturer knows, don't run this at 7,000 RPMs, your engine will explode. And so you stay safely below, but you don't know what your red line is at any given point. Even for a marathoner, if they were to run 100 miles one day, maybe they get, injured at mile 51, because that's double what a typical marathon is. Like, everyone has a capacity, and you exceed it, you get injured, and you just don't know what that capacity is. And it builds up over time. That's why you have to take it step by step and really just be cautious. And like we both said, live to fight another day. And if you feel like you're starting to feel, my body is talking to me a little bit, maybe this is the time to back off.
And that's a really hard part of all of this in a long season like baseball. Kids are starting in January with their high school winter workouts, and they're going until October, November with showcases. That's longer than a Major League Baseball season. It's just a plain fact. And that's really hard when kids are trying to vie for scholarships. They're trying to find a spot on a team. They're trying to find their place in this world. And look, my playing days are long behind me, but my self-identity is still as a baseball player. Dan, we talk about this all the time with wearing that baseball uniform underneath what I'm wearing today. It's the costume that hides. It's my Superman costume underneath the polo that I'm wearing right now. There's still a jersey under here somewhere. And it's really, baseball is such a great sport. It's a fabric of our culture, and it's just something that is, kids want to play. And look, when you love a game as much as we do, you want to make sure that the guys still playing it aren't a statistic.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's end this video with what happens towards the very end. So we talk about this is months 4 to 8. Months 6, 7, and 8, what is the player doing, and where is the line, where then we'll jump into the rest in our next video, which will cover months 8 through 12.
So in the months 6, 7, and 8, you're progressing your flat ground throwing program. Usually we have a hard stop around 120 feet for pitchers. For position players, specifically outfielders, we got to get them, and even catchers, we got to get them beyond 120 feet, because from home plate to second base is 127 feet. So for outfielders, they got to throw the ball 150, 180 feet at some point. But usually around 120 feet is where we'll let outfielders back to play using a cutoff man, and catchers can go back once they're throwing at 120 feet. But there are positional specific return to play phases that we want them to go through, like for catchers, doing first and third plays, bunt plays, throwing down to second, making sure that you're ready for gameplay as a full-time catcher. Some position players will go back as a DH to give their team a hand if their bat is needed in the lineup. Other guys will wait. But that 6 to 8 month mark for a pitcher, you're throwing from 60 to 100 to 120 feet. And then the next video, we'll talk about what it means to get back on the mound.
Okay, so last question. Say I'm a high school pitcher, and I'm probably going to pitch in college, but I'm a good player on my high school team. I'm a junior, let's say, for example, and I am cleared to play position. I can go play third base or outfield again. But like I said, I'm really like at heart a pitcher. Is it a good thing to go play a position on your sort of, rehab through as a pitcher? Or if you're like, I'm a pitcher through and through, should you not go play the position and just like stick with your rehab protocol and sit the bench through that high school season? Is there a pro and con to each, or, how do you typically advise pitchers who are able to play a position too, but maybe that's not their long-term thing for, their college or pro aspirations?
That's a common situation that comes up, especially in our office, where guys may be a PO in college, but at the high school level, because of depth charts, they have to be a two-way player. So what my recommendation is, and I actually had this conversation with a young kid yesterday, where he wants to go back and play basketball this upcoming offseason after his elbow surgery. And that's a different kind of situation than we're talking about now. But are you going to rehab as a baseball player and as a pitcher, or are you going to rehab as a position player? For some kids that are early in their high school career, freshmen, sophomores, maybe they are going to rehab as a position player to get back in time to hopefully solidify a spot in the future, and then worry about their pitching return to sport after maybe during the summer season when they have a little bit more free time to dedicate to weekend tournaments and then their mound work during the week. So it is a very common situation where that happens. But if you are dead set on being a pitcher and you're cleared to go back as a position player, but you're wishy-washy about it and you're just going to be a position player just to put your hat on the field, don't do it, in my opinion. Rehab as a pitcher, get back as a pitcher, and then whatever, if that's for your upcoming spring season, and then in the summertime, go back as a position player. You have to really look at what your future goals are and what your aspirations are, and my suggestion is to rehab as that position. Don't just go back because you're able to. Really dive into the rehab and own it.
All right, that's it. So as always, I'll link below to anything relevant to this video. Obviously, Tommy John rehab, Tommy John surgery, they're tough. This is such a big conversation. So if you have any questions that are unanswered, feel free to ask them in the description below. And then you can obviously follow up with Frank on the web and their team over at Dr. Ahmad's practice. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you here in the next video.